The shattering. Madison Carter stood in front of the nursery mirror adjusting the soft pink curtains she had hung just last week. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room, decorated with hand-painted animals and gentle pastels. She was 7 months pregnant now, and her due date felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. Her reflection showed a woman glowing with anticipation, wearing a light blue maternity dress that Brandon had always said looked beautiful on her. She placed her hand on a round belly, feeling the familiar flutter of her baby moving inside her, and she smiled, thinking about how Brandon would rush home from work today to feel the baby kick like he had been doing every evening for the past month. Downstairs in the kitchen, Madison prepared Brandon's favorite breakfast, eggs with toast and fresh strawberries, even though her own stomach felt queasy. She had been experiencing morning sickness less frequently, but today something felt different. Something in the air felt heavy and wrong, but she pushed the feeling aside. Brandon was probably just stressed about his big project at work. She knew he had been distant lately, coming home later and sometimes smelling faintly of perfume that she didn't recognize, but she had convinced herself it was just her pregnancy hormones making her paranoid. She heard the garage door open and her heart lifted. She set his plate on the table and waited for him to come through the door. But instead of his familiar footsteps, Brandon appeared with a small suitcase in his hand. His expression was cold and empty, like she was looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. Madison felt her knees weaken as she stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. Brandon refused to meet her eyes. He simply said he was leaving and that he didn't know when he would be back. Madison asked him where he was going, but he remained silent. She begged him to explain what was happening, her voice breaking with desperation, but he just grabbed his wallet and keys from the counter. He didn't even acknowledge the breakfast she had made or ask about the baby. He didn't kiss her goodbye. He didn't say he loved her. He simply walked out the door and drove away, leaving Madison standing alone in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly as if to protect the baby from the shattered pieces of the life they had built together. Everything she thought was real dissolved in that single moment of abandonment.
Madison had barely slept that night. She lay in the king-size bed that suddenly felt enormous and empty, staring at the ceiling as rain pounded against the windows. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of her own breathing and occasional sobs that escaped from deep within her chest. She kept waiting for her phone to ring, expecting Brandon to call with an explanation or to apologize. She checked it obsessively every few minutes, but there was nothing, just silence that was louder than any words could ever be. By morning, Madison had called Brandon over 30 times. Her calls went straight to voicemail. His assistant at work said he hadn't shown up and wouldn't answer her calls either. It was as if he had vanished from the world, leaving Madison alone with her fears and the life growing inside her. She felt physically ill, not just from pregnancy, but from the weight of abandonment pressing down on her chest. Around 10 in the morning, her phone rang and her heart jumped, hoping it was Brandon. But the voice on the other end belonged to someone she recognized, Richard Hayes, Brandon's boss. She had met him several times at corporate functions, and had always found him to be kind and professional, though somewhat reserved. Richard sounded genuinely concerned as he explained that Brandon had failed to show up for a critical meeting and wasn't responding to any communication from the office. As Richard spoke, Madison felt her voice crack as she revealed the truth that Brandon had left her yesterday without explanation, and she didn't know where he was. There was a long pause on the line, and then Richard asked if he could come by to check on her. He said no one should go through this alone, especially a pregnant woman. Madison initially hesitated, but desperation overrode her caution. She gave her address, still holding on to a tiny hope that maybe Richard would know something about Brandon, or perhaps had spoken to him. When Richard arrived at her door 3 hours later, Madison barely recognized the distinguished corporate executive. She saw instead a man with warm brown eyes and genuine concern etched across his face. He carried flowers and groceries, and when he stepped inside her home, it felt like the first moment of kindness she had experienced since Brandon walked out. He immediately made her sit down and began preparing soup while she sat at the kitchen table trembling and telling him everything. Richard listened without judgment. His presence was steady and grounding. In that moment, Madison realized she wasn't completely alone, and maybe, just maybe, there was still hope in this broken world.
Healing begins. Over the next few weeks, Richard became a fixture in Madison's life. He would arrive after work with groceries and healthy meals, preparing dinners that nourished both her body and her wounded spirit. He sat with her during doctor's appointments, holding her hand when the ultrasound technician showed them the strong, healthy heartbeat of her baby, growing stronger each day. He listened to all her fears about raising a child alone, and somehow, with his calm, steady presence, he made the impossible seem manageable. One evening, as they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset, Richard shared his own story. He had been married once to a woman he loved deeply, but she had left him when he was building his career, saying she felt abandoned despite his financial success. He had raised his daughter Emma alone for 8 years until she recently left for college. He told Madison that when he heard her story, something inside him broke because he saw the same pain he had once felt. He said he understood what it meant to be discarded by someone you trusted with your entire heart. Madison found herself drawn to Richard in ways she didn't expect to feel again. Her attraction wasn't the passionate intensity she had felt with Brandon. It was deeper, more genuine, built on genuine care and respect. She felt safe around him, and safety had become more precious than any fireworks ever could be. When he looked at her, she didn't see disappointment or judgment. She saw a man who truly saw her.
The return. Madison went into labor on a cold February morning exactly 3 weeks before her due date. Richard was by her side throughout every contraction, every moment of doubt and fear, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement that made her believe she was stronger than she had ever been. Their daughter, Emma Claire, was born as the sun rose, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and pink. She was perfect, with tiny fingers and a cry that seemed to announce her arrival to the entire world. Madison held her daughter against her chest and wept tears of joy and relief and gratitude. Richard cut the umbilical cord, his hands trembling with emotion. He looked at Madison with such tenderness that she felt her heart overflow. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then gently kissed the top of their baby girl's head. Madison had never used the word "there" before, but somehow it felt right. Somehow this beautiful man had become part of her journey in ways that transcended the traditional definitions of family. 3 days after bringing Emma home to the beautiful nursery that Richard had helped her prepare, Madison received an unexpected visitor. Brandon stood at her door, looking disheveled and desperate. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes held the wild desperation of a man losing everything. He demanded to see his daughter, but his voice lacked the warmth of a father longing to meet his child. Instead, he sounded like a man trying to reclaim a possession. Madison felt Richard tense beside her. He had come over that morning to help with the baby, and now he stood protectively near Madison and the infant. She had prepared herself for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, but standing face to face with Brandon, she felt nothing but sadness. For months she had imagined this confrontation filled with anger and accusations, but instead all she felt was profound disappointment and pity. She allowed Brandon to see Emma, but only under supervision. He held her daughter awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable and uninterested. He spent 15 minutes making small talk before revealing his true purpose. He had lost his job. He claimed Veronica had manipulated him, drained his savings, and abandoned him. He wanted to come home. He wanted his old life back. He wanted Madison. He said it as if she were a possession left on a shelf waiting for him to collect her again. Madison looked at this man who had shattered her world, and she realized she didn't recognize him anymore. Or perhaps she was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. The charming, successful executive had been an illusion, masking a selfish man incapable of real love. When Brandon pleaded with her to take him back, tears streaming down his face, Madison simply shook her head. She told him she had moved on and that she deserved better. She told him that their daughter would know her father, but Madison would never be his wife again. As she closed the door behind Brandon, Madison felt Richard gently place his hand on her back. She turned to him and saw the question in his eyes. She answered it without him asking. She said she loved him, truly and deeply, and that she wanted to build a real life with him, not rebuild the ruins of a fake one.
New beginnings. 6 months later, Madison stood in the garden of a small, elegant venue, surrounded by people who truly mattered to her. Her friends wept happy tears, her parents beamed with pride, and her daughter Emma, now 3 months old, slept peacefully in the nursery nearby. Madison wore a simple white dress that hugged her body in all the right places, and when she saw Richard at the altar, her breath caught in her throat. Richard looked at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. His eyes held promises of devotion, loyalty, and genuine love, the kind that was built on truth rather than illusion. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves. Madison spoke about finding strength in her darkest hour and discovering that sometimes the greatest loves emerge from the deepest pain. She told Richard that he had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, and that marrying him felt like coming home. Richard spoke with his voice thick with emotion about the moment he saw Madison standing in her kitchen, broken but not defeated. He said he had spent years believing love was a luxury for other people, until she showed him that it was possible to build something real, something lasting, something true. He promised to stand by her through every challenge, to be present for Emma, and to spend the rest of his life showing her that real love meant showing up every single day. The reception was filled with laughter and dancing and genuine joy, the kind of celebration that felt earned and precious. After they cut the cake and shared their first dance as husband and wife, Madison and Richard stood on the terrace looking out at the stars. She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt completely at peace. Brandon had eventually tried to rebuild his life too. Though Madison heard he was struggling, working as a junior associate at a smaller firm, far removed from the corporate heights he had once occupied. His relationship with Veronica had imploded, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his choices. Madison wished him no ill will. She simply hoped he would learn from his mistakes and perhaps become the father Emma deserved, even if he could never be the husband Madison needed. Madison had transformed from a devastated, abandoned woman into a strong, confident mother and partner. She had learned that true love wasn't about passion or perfection. It was about presence. It was about choosing each other every single day. It was about building something real with someone who valued you not for what you had, but for who you were. As Richard pulled her close and kissed her under the stars, Madison understood that sometimes the best stories are the ones where you think everything is lost, only to discover that you are making room for something infinitely better. She had lost a marriage built on lies, but she had gained a life built on truth, and that was the greatest redemption of all.